Well, good morning, everyone. How are you? First of all, thank you so much for coming to our session. We're very grateful. We've got a lot to share with you. So let me introduce myself to you. My name is Saira Jazrai. I'm a Senior Ethics and Compliance Advisor at LRN. Let me introduce my panel. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nicole Pitts, and I am the Vice President and Compliance and Ethics Officer at Berger International, which is a civil engineering firm based in London.
I'm Paige Moats. I'm the Director of Strategic Programs, Ethics and Ethics Operations for Dell. We are a global technology company based out of Austin, Texas.
I'm David Potofsky. I'm the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of NewsCorp. We are based here but operate in the United States, the UK, and Australia, primarily in publishing newspapers and books, but also increasingly in the online space with digital real estate and other online content.
So, from my own experience, my previous companies, I've been at Marshall McLennan Companies. I was there for 8 years. I was responsible for enterprise policy development, training, and communications. And I got to tell you, from that experience, working from codes of conduct, development of a code of conduct, all the way to training, if you do it right, it can change behavior, it raises awareness of risk, and engages people. I mean, that's really, I think, the recipe for changing behavior. Do it right, engage appropriately, and you'll get that result. My panel here are going to share their ingredients or their secret sort of recipe on how they have used training innovations to change behavior. It's not easy to do. It takes time. But you have to do it consistently well and execute well. It's not a one thing, just throw it out there and hope someone does a training and you'll get engagement. You have to work at it. And so I'll start off. I think I'll start off with Paige first. And I like the way. I mean, I have to say, I like the way you operationalize training because I think that's the most effective way of actually getting to the inner organization. So perhaps you could sort of share your sort of training innovations and why it sort of came about and what sort of problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah, sure. So there are really three things, and I won't go into heavy detail, at least not right at this moment, on them, but kind of three things that Dell has done. Like many of you, been doing this a long time. We've had many different kinds of training programs, but what we decided is we needed to kind of have a much more multifaceted approach. And so kind of three things that I'll talk about at a high level. We decided to dip our toes starting 3 years ago, and then our latest item was about a year ago into game-based learning. I know there are a lot of people that are like, not for us, or boy, that doesn't sound like something we could do. So I'll talk in a moment about kind of how we dipped that. But game-based learning was something that we definitely did. Another thing that we really decided to do pretty heavily is we decided to partner with the business to create a much more effective in-person training. So you can see the opposite ends of the spectrum. We've got in-person, and it's 4 hours. I know that would make most people choke, but I'll tell you later why that actually worked, and we got amazing scores. And then somewhere also in the fun spectrum is that we really doubled down on events, both events for our senior-most executives, events for that mid-level individual, events at the frontline level, and then an event that our customers were involved in. So really looking at all of the spectrum. So kind of you can see both. And we have the traditional online training and things like that as well. But these were the three things we decided to double down, and now they've become signature programs. And the reason why you talked about why. The reason why is that, especially on game-based learning, we started out with a very superficial, selfish reason to start. We just wanted to be cool, right? Online training no longer is just cool. Back in the 90s, that was super cool. Now that's not cool anymore. Not that it's a bad thing to happen. We have it. But we really wanted to be kind of like that cool aunt that, she's still an adult and you've got to hang out with her, but she'll take you to Dave & Buster's and let you play video games all day. We wanted to be the cool aunt. So we dipped our toe in game-based learning for that reason, to first have the cool factor, but our response was so overwhelming that they loved it.
So why do they love it?
They loved it because it allowed them to practice making decisions in a safe space,
Right.
in a fun and engaging way, and their memory recall was higher. Whenever you do the normal online training and it's click, 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 make no mistake, everybody click, click, clicks. I don't care how cool and how many awesome videos there are, it always is a click, click, click. Game-based, actually, you had to make strategic decisions or you would literally die in the game. And we made the stakes that high. And so people didn't want to die in the game, but also they loved it because it was competitive. And there was a scoreboard, and you could see, not your name, you had to put a gamer name in, but you could see your score against others. And that natural human desire to compete. I don't know if anybody heard PepsiCo's chairman last night at the gala, but she was talking about this natural competition she was raised with. Everybody has that, right? So that was a big part of it.
Oh, wow. Developing games, I got to say, doing sort of game-based training at my sort of previous company, it's very difficult to do right. Some compliance, especially with compliance, you can't make it silly. So you actually sort of capped in terms of your audience. You knew exactly how they sort of ticked and what actually drives them. So that's really hard to do. So how did you learn that? What was your...
We started with some focus groups and surveys trying to get a sense of where the appetite was.
Okay.
Again, we dipped our toe in the very first game. We didn't do anything custom. It was pretty much off the shelf, a couple of tweaks here and there. Then we did a lot of focus groups and surveys afterwards. What did you love? And then tell us very explicitly what you hated.
Right.
We wanted the extremes. And we took all of the things that they loved. We doubled down in our second game. I'll tell you about that in a second. Then the third, the things they hated, we couldn't change some of it, and some of it, we really took to heart and made edits to. So our second game wasn't about fun. Our second game was bringing together complex concepts
Right.
and really bringing them to life in a way that traditional training doesn't, and also like concepts, like topics. So a lot of times people put out a cyber or an InfoSec course, separately a privacy course. We brought those concepts together. One game covered everything. They understood when they walked away all of these things are connected, and they could practice in a safe space, but it was really a different look and feel game. We wanted each game to have its own personality,
Right.
but with some similarities based off of the journey of man model. But I think that taking really complex topics and like topics and putting them together was our second game. And then our third game, again, based off of really robust feedback. What did you love? What did you hate? And we also used a traditional corporate indicator called NPS. We did an NPS scoring model. So it wasn't just, did you like it? It wasn't a smile sheet. It was, would you actually recommend it to someone else? And if that wasn't high, that was not going to be good. And we had a 96% NPS on the first game. We had a 97% NPS on the second game,
Right.
and a 98% on the third game, which was where we took that concept of not just connecting concepts that were like together, but connecting the concept of ethics and compliance to business outcomes. So that was the third game.
Okay. And then in terms of your sales training, tell me a little bit about that, how you embedded training within the
in-person
process.
training?
The in-person training, how you embedded that within the process, the business process.
So the in-person training, we took a cue from our code game, which is you cannot build training that connects the dots between business outcomes and ethics and compliance unless you actually partner with the business to build that game. So we did. We learned a lot of lessons.
Right.
So we decided to partner with the business again, leaders in sales, sales learning and development team, and sales operations to build out something called Leading from the Front, which was for frontline sales personnel, mostly in emerging countries where we didn't have, let's say, corporate functions on site to really
Right.
monitor behavior. And so co-built with them and co-facilitated. So when we rolled it out, each facilitator had to have a certification to facilitate. You had to go through a practice process. And we co-facilitated ethics and compliance or legal. So there was either one could, but we co-facilitated with sales. So it felt like part of the sales side. So it connected ethics and compliance to the sales cycle. So what does it mean on gifts and hospitality when you're trying to acquire business, right? What does it mean on an antitrust scenario when you're working with channel partners, so those kinds of things.
Oh, wow. Excellent. And so how was it received?
Very well. We
Yes.
did an NPS score, but we also did, because we co-developed it with sales and sales learning and development, we used their model of how they actually assessed effectiveness of their own training. We assessed it alongside theirs. And I'm actually pretty excited to say we scored as good, if not better, than almost every sales training they've ever taken, including our own product training, which was like embarrassing, but it was awesome. But we couldn't have done that. I mean, the ethics and compliance team couldn't have delivered that kind of value doing it as a solo exercise. It was only because we listened and partnered and worked very closely with sales learning.
Do you think that's the secret?
That is the secret sauce. Don't do it alone, right? So
Okay.
make best friends with all of those people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paige. Nicole. So Nicole has been doing videos, which I got to tell you is I think it's really important to do that as part of your sort of training communication strategy. We live in a YouTube world now, and people don't read anymore, which is sad. But they want engagement, and so Nicole took videos to another level. But I love the way she actually implemented it within the organization. So go ahead.
Yeah, the way that Lewis Berger works is that we are a little bit different than other businesses because we do a lot of projects. And because we do civil engineering, we bid on projects to build metros, bridges, so there's a finite time in which we may have employees. We do a lot of joint ventures, too, with our competitors. So it's important for those employees to see that they are still part of Lewis Berger. So we've had to do a lot of in-person training. And as Erica said this morning, time is our most valuable asset. And if you're trying to get them to come off a project which has very concrete deadlines, you need to make sure you're maximizing that time. You're not only showing value to your employees, but also the clients, because you're taking time away from them and their deliverables. Clients have attended our sessions, and one of the things we've been able to do over the past 18 months is clients actually pay for us to do this, to do the training. And what I mean by that is, compliance and ethics is a call center. And operations love to see our annual budget every year. They're like, yay! But when we do bid out work, we have now been able to show that ethics and compliance actually provides a competitive value. We have a whole plan for the project where we come on site. We not only do risk assessments, but we have regularly scheduled training. And we're able to bill the client for those trainings now. So that was a big win for us because they do see the value in that, but they had to come and kind of see what we were doing. Because we try to do training on a regular basis and change it up from just online training, we started to look at innovative ways in order to do that training. So like Paige with gamification, we also have limited funds. So we were looking at what do we have. So I know a lot of you may know about the clickers, like Turning Technology has those clickers. I don't know. I'm sure other companies do too. But looking at were we maximizing the value? You're paying for those, for the license, but were we using it to its fullest extent? And we weren't, because you can do gamification that way. You can do the MVP, people that respond the most. You can make it that where they're competing against each other using teams with those clickers. I also went on Amazon and just spent like $12 on 4 clickers. They were for kids, but they make all these noises. And people love noises. So, I think we're all kids at heart. So when we did training, especially town halls, because a lot of my town halls were really focused on getting these employees, especially on our projects and our JVs, to really connect to our company. What are our values? What is compliance and ethics? What's our program? Because most of these people didn't know who we were. So it was really introducing us that way, and then also using videos. Now, moving from working in the U.S. operations to international, it's a big culture shock because some of the videos that we would use on the U.S. side did not work internationally. I used to watch the show Hoarders when I lived in the States. I was like, that's me. But talk about records information management. If you want to use that someplace else, like I was based in the Paris office for a while, and I did the video, and they were like, no, Missy. And I was like, but this is funny. And they're like, I don't get it. But it's looking at making sure that the videos that you use really work for that particular culture. So we use the Real Biz Shorts. And like I really love their antitrust cookie ones, but Girl Scout cookies aren't something that's worldwide known in every culture. But there are some that really translate, like for Careful Communications, the lady at the airport talking loudly on her phone about this deal she's going to close, except she's got these labor issues, and people really connected to that. Animated shorts is another one, and they're all subtitled too. Animated shorts work. I piloted the videos with smaller groups. We have a compliance champion program. We have people from different regions, different projects, and different groups that meet on a monthly basis. And we like to pilot all of our training with them to get feedback. Is it culturally sensitive? Did you understand what you were supposed to get out of this training? And what can we do to modify it to make sure it works for you? There are sometimes we have to modify it based on that particular region, and we'll have a regional specific training for them. Some of the things we do in the Middle East, we have to make sure it's more sensitive than what we would do in maybe India. We also use ACFE videos, and those are things that you can use for free. We get permission from ACFE, and they have great animated shorts about tips on being a fraudster. And they're silent, they're not translated, but for our international audience, because they are silent, you just see the animation with the subtitles. We talk over them in the local language to explain what's going on. And then SAI Global is one of the ones that we use for whiteboards, and I love the whiteboarding. And they're really short videos, and we use them for our learning management system, so that's part of utilizing our licenses to the fullest of what do you have out there, what can we embed in our training, right. And that whiteboard was something that we weren't using, but we were paying for these services. So always look to see what are the new things out there that you can be using. And then finally, 2 weeks ago in our Compliance Champion training, I used a movie trailer, and recently I'd seen Black Panther. I loved it. And but everybody was talking about Black Panther, and I was seeing it in Paris and Hong Kong, and all these people were talking about it, and it got me to thinking about using movies and films and TV shows that are global. People know about the Marvel comics and DC comics. I don't. I seemed cool when I first did the trailer, and then they were asking me questions. I was like, is Hulk DC? And they were like, but I did Captain America, because I didn't want to spoil anything for Black Panther, but using Captain America Civil War to talk about the ethical decision-making that Captain America used with his friend, the Winter Soldier. And using that concept of some of the decisions that he made, and even Tony Stark, what the decisions that he made, who were their stakeholders, looking at the public, and where they said, we're going to put together these guidelines for how you act, controls that are going to be in place to manage you, how they reacted to that, and the division there, and how do we react when controls are put in place. I wasn't quite sure how that was going to go. We did that with our compliance champions, but they really loved it. And because those trailers are available in so many languages, we're able to use that and pilot it throughout our organization. So those are just a few of the things that we do from a video standpoint, but we always make sure that we get the go-ahead from the people that we license it from or use, just so that we're not infringing on anybody's copyright. And it helps us to, in addition to having those full-blown trainings that you have to have every year, that we do the snackable information. So the compliance awareness posters, these short videos that you can push out in training or even via email to where they can watch those. But it's that continuing information so that people can continue to have it. And as things come up, then we look at making sure we message that in an infographic or a live broadcast or one of our compliance sessions, the town halls or the compliance champion sessions.
So do you put together for something like that, I think it's amazing that you're using different kinds of assets to communicate the same sort of message. How is that sort of framed? I love the Captain America. I think it's a great idea. It's very creative. But how does that sort of work? Are you sort of asking, how is the messaging done? How do you train on that? So just give me an example of sort of a...
Well, when we used it, we just did it, as I said, first time 2 weeks ago,
Okay.
and it was in our compliance champion session.
Okay.
And we used that to talk about industry trends. We talked about GDPR, what's the latest in that, information security, because we've had to deal with a lot of phishing attacks lately. But then as I was talking to employees, we are always talking about our favorite movies, TV shows. Netflix is a big one. And then it's one of those things, I thought if we can turn the discussion from some of our favorite shows that we normally talk about around the water cooler and use that to connect to some of the ethical decision making, like Peaky Blinders.
Right.
I just got introduced to that. It's a great show. Watch it. But it's something that's very, I think, UK-centric. Mm-hmm. Maybe they watch it here in the U.S., but we were having that discussion, and in trying to do the more global training, I really looked for something that I knew was every place, like the Marvel shows and things like that. But I've also asked our champions to give us feedback on different TV shows and films that they would like to talk about, and talk about some of the ethical decisions that come up from that, and then they start presenting too. So it's not that these conversations are just compliance leading them, but we invite our compliance champions and team members to also do some presentations on either their project or upcoming a favorite show where they'll have a clip and explain kind of the ethical decisions that have to be made.
And these compliance champions, are they compliance officers or are they business people, or what's their makeup?
They're all business people. We looked into the business, so they can be there's somebody from each department, as well as operations and even our projects. As I said, we really need to have that link in projects. We have so many projects. It's hard for compliance to be there face to face more than once a year, because we are a small team of just 5 people, and we operate in over 50 countries. So we try to get where we can, but having that person that's there, they can also do some mini training for us and share these types of things with them.
I think from the NewsCorp perspective, it might be helpful to step back and talk a little bit about my perspective. NewsCorp doesn't actually have a compliance risk enterprise-wide that's as high as some other companies. Not only are we not in regulated industries, the Constitution prohibits the regulation of the industries that we're in. That having been said, we're on high alert for compliance failures, because before I joined in 2011, there was quite a serious compliance failure in the London newspapers that included some FCPA issues. Again, before I joined, the company hired external consultants to come in and help build a gold standard FCPA policy, and that's what I adopted. It was sort of built in a laboratory, and it had all the bells and whistles, but because it had to be done very quickly, there were 2 different criminal investigations going on. The company wanted to make sure that it had remediated very quickly. I myself was part of the remediation. I have a DOJ background, and bringing me in was part of the remediation. But once I inherited it, I could see that it wasn't getting through particularly well. It was a very top-down approach for a company that has many different cultures around the world. The American culture, the UK culture, the Australian culture, the traditional journalism culture versus the startup culture. We were sort of talking past the employees. So we really tried to pull apart what training and communication means, and think about the fact that while we had very much relied on training, that what we really needed to do was not so much train people, but talk to them. I think of training as like literally there's laws out there that you may not be familiar with that you need to understand before you go out and do business so you don't make a mistake. That is an important part of aspects of compliance. But a huge part of it is not training specifically, it's communication.
I agree.
It is, specifically, I think most people want to do the right thing. The communication is specifically when you meet a situation in which doing the right thing the right way is in tension with achieving what you see as your short-term business goal. Can you please let the better angels of your nature win out over the lesser angels of your nature? And so we really then sort of thought about, well, what are the different ways to communicate? And we all, I'm sure, have sort of a complicated matrix of ways to communicate. There's global versus local. There's online versus in person. There's periodic versus just in time. There's general versus case specific. And what we really try to do is teach ourselves what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of those things and try to match up the communication experience with what the business person needs particularly. And I can talk about it. I just like to throw out what I'm afraid with this group, which is very creative and is giving extremely good practical tips. I want to throw out an old school, I think, pitch for in-person training, which is I actually think a big part of communication is not what you're saying to the employees, but what they're saying back to you. We all think that we know what it is we need to be saying to them, but we don't actually know what's in their mind and what's confusing them.
Yes.
And so many times when we do go out and do in-person training, the most interesting things that happen is not on the topic that we went there to speak about. It's the person that comes up later and says, well, wait, you seem to be a person who thinks a lot about issues like this. I think I have an issue like this. What do you think? And then they proceed to tell you some ghastly idea that they have. And you say, well, thank you very much for asking the question, and let's talk that through. And you really need to sort of surface the ghastly ideas. And I do think you can't do in-person training. It's too inefficient.
Right.
But when we see a higher risk, for us, for example, would be when we have sports journalists who are going to Rio for the Olympics or the World Cup. Like, that's just a thing. And we're going to want to go and do some tailored, just-in-time, in-person training for them in the hopes of having the conversation and both educating them but also listening to the things that they think they're going to confront and trying to talk through what the right answer is ahead of time.
So tell us, in terms of the communications, apart from in-person training, what else do you do?
So, again, we started with this very top-down approach, and we were sort of talking at people in the language of lawyers and PwC in New York. And over time, we have found that, I think a lot of the literature talks about culture beginning with tone at the top. And I think that we have started to think that tone at the top is crucial, but that culture actually begins at the bottom and not the top. That different people, different professions, different cultures sort of see things differently. And to talk to them, you have to figure out the way they see the situation. You have to figure out the way to embed the compliance message in a way that is not in parallel to, but woven in with what their business goals are. So, for example, we had the CEO of the London newspaper businesses do an online module where he said, he wrote this himself, which is what made it so genuine and impactful, that he started by saying that the newspapers did such incredible work, especially the investigative journalists who bring powerful forces, including governments, to account and call them out when they're misbehaving, but that we can't do that work if we don't hold ourselves to those similarly high standards. We can't be criticizing the people that we write about if we're hypocritically not holding ourselves to those standards. And you could just see everybody was like, well, yeah, That's true. That's absolutely true. But that's just the newspapers in London.
Right.
And so we really have to go to each of the businesses and we try to figure out how is it they really see the world? How is it they try to balance aggressive business behavior with careful business behavior? And also, where does culture get made in the company? You know, culture doesn't get made through the emails and the training videos as much as that would be great for us. It gets made in small places. It's in the town hall meetings. It's in the weekly meetings. It's in the places where people are called out in front of everybody and acknowledged for the good work that they do. It's different in every organization. It's different in every part of the organization. So we really try to go out through the compliance organization and fix where we started, which was very top down, and try to build it ground up. With business partners in each of the business units, we find that we can do it. It doesn't feel exhausting to have to go and slightly tailor the message in each of the individual businesses. It feels like it's very accomplishable.
Wow. And so, I mean, that's a wonderful story. I just was just sort of thinking, I mean, was this sort of this message from this leader from London, was it sort of just something that he did by his own sort of choice, or it was just something that, he was, how did he come, what prompted that?
I think what happened was after this Frankenstein's monster of a compliance program was put into the field,
right,
a lot of the businesses did raise their hand and say, we don't think this is going to be effective. And we basically told them to be quiet, because there were open criminal investigations and there was a need to say, we have this gold standard policy and it's been applied throughout the business and you don't have to worry. But then we passed through that period and it was appropriate to take a different look at it. And so we started to listen a little bit more. They wanted to do something they thought would be effective locally. They thought in particular that messages from New York, from HQ, were less impactful than messages from people who were known to the employees locally. So there was always a desire. People want to be effective locally as well. We just were in a position that we could listen a little bit more and be more partners with them and let them take a little bit more of the lead in fashioning what they thought the message should be.
Great. No, thank you for sharing that. It's wonderful. I mean, you talked about just a little bit about sort of leadership and sort of working sort of bottoms up, and I think that is the right way to do it. But how do you engage the tone at the top? Because that is also critical. Right.
So I think a couple things. I'll sort of expand the question a little bit. I have a strong view that there's lots of things you can do around compliance and training in particular where you're going to have a very good objective record of what you did, so that if someone comes and asks you, did you do everything you should have, you can show them your training statistics and your certifications that have been signed and all that sort of stuff. But I don't really think that that's the kind of stuff that stuff can be very effective if you need to defend a program that had a problem, but I'm not sure that's the way you stop a problem from happening in the first place. I think the way you stop a problem from happening in the first place is things as subtle as business people coming to a meeting with the CEO and raising a business idea that has too much risk, and the CEO sort of crinkling his or her nose like, I don't think so, and not even articulating anything in particular, but just making it perfectly clear that that's not an attractive idea. And I've been in these meetings where we had an acquisition in an area of the world that is more risky,
right,
and we were going to be wading into something that would be more unpredictable. And the CEO just was unpersuaded that it was worth taking on the risk. I was in the meeting. I couldn't even tell you what exactly he said or what gesture was involved, but I can tell you that the message was read loud and clear. I have a problem, which is if the DOJ ever comes and asks me to prove it, I can't. I don't even know what I would say, and they wouldn't believe me anyway.
Even with your background?
Even with my background.
We're all
Even with my
hopeless then.
background.
If we...
So I think which is not to say get rid of all the stuff that is objectively verifiable. It's try to find the right balance and just know sometimes that the most effective things that you do are going to be the least able to show people you did them. And just know that and be okay with it.
No, thank you for sharing that. Paige, what's your experience engaging senior leaders?
You know, I literally agree with everything he has to say. One of the reasons why we did our Leading from the Front sales training in person, and it's so funny, back in the day when you would say, I want to do this great online course, people would go, we just like the old way. Now, if you want to do in person, they go, until they get into it and they realize, man, that's the way we want to do it. Right. Because you can't talk to the highest risk group in your company, 40,000 salespeople. No, I didn't hit all 40,000, but I hit about 10,000 over a 2-year period. The highest risk 10,000. Again, with people helping us in a co-facilitation. But you totally raise a great point, which is the engagement, the discussion. So it wasn't a talkette. It was an interactive cohort, no more than 40 people in a room ever allowed at any one time. So that's actually more than we wanted. So that the dialogue was everything. And it was the most meaty, rich, interesting, sometimes ghastly stuff, but the right people were in the room to handle it. And they, by raising questions, their own sales leader would go, And that, again, just the look was great. So I really agree with that. I also feel like what Nicole mentioned is so valuable, too, which is you have to mix it up, right? So if you're doing all in-person training, like you even said, communications, that's probably not the way to go. If you're doing all online training, that's not the way to go. If you're only looking at training as an event and not a throughout the year item, that's not the way to go. So I think what you're hearing from all three of us is mix it up, try new things, but never stop that engagement back, because we learn more about how to be more effective by what we hear back. And the more we speak to, the more they'll tune out. They're not listening to anything. So I love what both of you had to say, because I think everybody's program should have pieces of all of these things, whatever works for that culture.
Nicole, any comments?
Yes, I think that from tone at the top, we have a really great tone at the top, but we're currently under a 3-year DPA. We're at the end. So one of the critical things that we've been able to do is get that feedback from the DOJ on the program. And when we had our first baseline assessment, Wei Chen was still with the DOJ, and you're saying, here are all the bells and whistles. We are great. She was like, that's nice. How are you measuring this? How do you make sure that your employees are getting the information that they need? At the time, we were just doing the in-person and online training. That's from that meeting, that's when we got into that more snackable information, the compliance awareness posters that change every quarter, the videos that we were utilizing. Because what happens was, as our monitor was talking to employees, those are things that they could remember. And they would say, yes, I did, I've seen these posters, I know where my code is. The retention grew so much. Also, our president at the time said, I told you about the project. So safety is a huge issue when you're working in the construction industry. It's like your number one. We needed to make sure that ethics was also co-number one, not number two, but co-number one. As Ricky Bobby said, you can't have two number ones. That would make 11. But when you look at this, our president said we're going to do meeting moments. So they would start off those meeting moments talking about safety. Now we also have ethics. So you have a safety moment and an ethics moment, and that is required from our CEO. It says you must start every meeting with an ethics and a safety moment. And it was very painful for people in the beginning. It's like that Homer Simpson gif where he would fade into the bushes. You'd ask them for an ethics moment, and they were like,
where shall I start?
Does she see me if I'm standing still? So what we ended up doing was every month, the Office of Compliance and Ethics, as well as the Office of Health and Safety, create meeting moments that are published. So you have a theme for the month, and then you have weekly themes. They're published in our 3 official languages, French, English, and Spanish. And that way, when they have a meeting, they can always just pull those moments and say, this is what we're going to do. They do it with our partners, our clients. It's really started to kind of take off into with our clients doing them as well. So really, I think that's a good tone from the top that was set by our CEO to say this is just as important as safety and holding people accountable to make sure they do it.
So we talked about tone at the top. What about tone at the middle? How do you engage managers? They're really important to drill down the training and communication. So how do you do that?
For me, whenever I go on site, I always talk to whoever is maybe the project director, because that's the tone at the top for those employees. They have no connection to the CEO. There might be so far away, especially if we're doing a project in India. They don't care what's going on in Morristown. They say that their project director is really who they look to for influence. So that's the person that I always have a one-on-one conversation with. I also have regional compliance officers who make sure that they go out and they're talking to HR, your compliance champions. We have a lot of those in-person town halls. And what we find is that from those, we tend to have these sessions afterwards, because once they see you're there and they are now able to link compliance and ethics as a place to go to talk about particular issues, then we have to have these little sessions to where people can come and talk to us afterwards, kind of to like your point of once you're there, then they start to raise things, and you want to make sure you're troubleshooting those, but also that you're sharing that information, because you might also see trends from different regions and different maybe like business development, that type of thing, but empowering your management there,
right.
Because sometimes they don't feel as empowered because they may not have the transparency or know what's been going on from a corporate level, because they're so focused on getting the job done, but it's letting them know where things are, being a resource for them. I do monthly meetings with different managers.
Right.
So, and then my staff does as well. So those meetings could be a half hour, they could be 5 minutes, but it just depends on what they need.
So what is the, in terms of engaging middle management, what are the challenges and what is it that they want? I'm sure, just from my own experience, managers, they want to talk about it, but how? That's really, how do you, what are the challenges you see and what do you sort of provide them to help them with that conversation?
A lot of the challenges are time,
Okay.
just being able to have that time, wanting to do things, especially if we say you're mandated to do the meeting moments, for example,
Okay.
and they're working on a joint venture, and then the partner says, well, we don't have to do this. What they need is to be able to show value in the things that we're doing, knowing how to raise situations, and then also just having an FAQ. We developed frequently asked questions, case scenario guides, a lot of tools in our toolkit that's online to help them manage certain situations that we would see that would come up. Because they were like, I don't know how to respond to this,
Right.
Especially if there could be perceived retaliation, and not understanding that this actually is a compliance concern or an HR concern, and it could violate the code, and they may try to troubleshoot it on their own when they really need to elevate that. So it's empowering them to know to elevate it to the right group.
No, I agree. Paige?
There's a couple of different things on the manager front that we've attempted to do. I mentioned events earlier. Every single year, Dell has a very large customer conference. They used to gather in Austin. Now it's Vegas. Well, that's even more special. So what we do is, for a while, we were doing. We somehow begged, borrowed, and stole. I don't know how we convinced people to let us have a half-day risk symposium for managers. Usually we would let the top executives come, but it was really meant to be that non-executive management level that were often coming in to meet with customers, and not even just salespeople, marketing people, sometimes the supply chain side, on the channel partner side. And we would, whatever the key risk area was that was either emerging or things that the DOJ was talking about related to key areas, we would highlight. And we made it really nice. Dell managers don't often get really nice stuff done for them. They're doing nice stuff for other people. So we would make it nice. So we would have it in the same hotel the conference was going to be held in. In the very beginning, we would literally select together all of our money and put it into that and hope it went well. Now, many years later, the business actually helps pay for it. So I don't even have to put it in my own budget, which is shocking. So they're like, we want better food. We'll help pay. Great, not a problem. So when we would invite outside speakers, we brought in Chuck DeRoss, former DOJ. We brought in, people that was a former FTC commissioner. So a lot of different people that were outside, because we didn't want to just have our own experts up there. That's great, but our people tended to listen a lot more intently to people from outside of the company when partnered with inside the company. So we would do an event. And that's really turned into a signature program, and now we do events at our top level, when you're talking about tone at the top, for their global worldwide leadership meeting. And then we also do that very next day when the conference would start, we'd have our booth, our fun booth, because we're the cool aunt, and the customers would come. And we found there was more learning that came out of customers visiting our booth to our own employees, because the customer would come back and talk to the employee, and the employee would feel really stupid if they did not understand the stuff we were talking about at the booth. So it became this wonderful cycle. But the second thing that we did is, because coming out of that cycle, the managers were saying, we need more stuff, toolkits, right? We need more stuff. So we created toolkits, one sheets, a variety of things, but what we had the problem with is that we would put it on our intranet site, and we'd go, your toolkit's there, and then nobody would come to the intranet site. We were like, the most beautiful intranet site ever. What's your problem? And they were like, we don't think about your intranet site. So we said, so we should embed it elsewhere. So we would go to the PR team, the marketing team, the brand team, the sales operations team, and go, where do your managers get stuff? And they're like, we have these great newsletters. They look forward to it every month. Can we have this much space? So we started unhinging our stuff and putting it there. But that's just our culture. I know other cultures, they're very successful in having people leverage their intranet site. Ours has been iffy, so we had to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct. A little bit more work, but we've seen it's got a lot greater take rate, and it also has reduced the kind of mass emails and things that we've had to send out to.
To tell you the truth, I don't know the answer to your question. Since I sort of run the group, the job of making sure the message gets through at that level is done by people out in the field. But I'm meeting with the team this afternoon, and it's such a good question that I've written it down here, and I will be raising it with them this afternoon.
Perfect. Well, let me just talk a little bit about training effectiveness. And so, what kind of metrics do you measure? And which ones, and if you do measure sort of training metrics, which ones matter?
For us, we do a few different things. Our communications group, to your point, Paige, every month they send me a report that says, what's the click rate on our toolkit by subject matter area, and also the other departments. So it's almost like it's a competition between us, legal, safety. But when we go out, we always message about our toolkit. We send the links out afterwards, but it's always good to see the spikes, and we can look at it by region as well. So we're able to really see if people are looking at the documents and the tools that we have available. For other metrics, when we do the clickers, you can download that immediately after the session, and you can see what engagement was, how many answered the question correctly, based upon that real-time feedback. A lot of the gamification, I think, is good because you know where your issues are and really where to focus some of your training. If there are some regions where we had an area that seemed to be a little tricky, then we go back and follow up soon afterwards to make sure we're just focusing on that particular area. And then finally, we get a lot of that just from the feedback because of the assessment that's currently being done every few months to ask our employees about the effectiveness of the training, asking them specific questions about what's in the code, the training, where they can find the information, and giving that back to us. Every month, all employees, they do small group discussions on a piece of the code or our compliance management system that really track to the 7 elements of the best compliance program. So those are the ways that we look at trying to leverage those metrics.
And do you change your approach, or how do you share those data points as well? Those metrics. How do you use them, and how do you change your approach?
We look at them to see where we're getting the traction, and then if we see low results someplace, then we do look at why we might have that.
Right.
Maybe it's the training isn't clear. If we're doing it in English, because we do have a very multicultural environment, then I'm looking at maybe what we need to do is do it more in a local language. We always do it in French, Spanish, and English, but there might be, we might need to do it in Hindi if understanding is low. We do have a code in 9 different languages, but we do look at that because there are times, when you're doing in-person training, you can see that maybe they're not understanding, and I always ask,
right.
Do you understand what it is? Or even with some of the videos, the subtitles could go by very quickly, and they may not read as fast. So it's looking at how do you really change it to make that more effective for them. But that's really more targeted and on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Some of the same stuff that Nicole mentioned. I definitely think that click rate thing is fabulous. And that's how we figured out we were not doing so hot, so we had to make our change. So it's very valuable feedback. I think the MPS thing is a very big thing at Dell. But I would also say one that we've really started to do is many of us in the room probably do a culture survey of some kind. We do ours every other year because we want to get the results, and then we want a full year's worth of making change and evolving things before we resurvey. But we have started adding into some custom questions, more detailed questions around, are the resources and the training you're getting actually making a business impact? And then if the answer is no, we go into some branching questions on why not. And we have to make some assumptive. We don't want a text box. It would be too long to get 100. We usually get about, out of 140,000 employees this past year, we got 45,000 people responded voluntarily, which is a huge take rate on a survey that's every other year. But they give us a lot of honest feedback about what works and what doesn't from a training and awareness and communication standpoint. And then we ask a lot of detail, like, where do you go to get blah, blah, blah?
Right.
How do you get this information? Do you feel like you can get it from your manager? So we try to use that data.
Right.
And then the other things that we started doing about 2 years ago, simply because it was more about checking against our resource allocation, and that is we really do track inquiries, not only from our employees, questions that we get, but we also track customer RFP requests. We've seen that we have gone up exponentially in customers wanting deep dive details on our ethics and compliance programs. Not just do you have one check, do you have an anti-corruption program? They want to know what kind of controls we have in play. Separate from how we answer those things, we track all of that stuff because we want to be able to show we need more training in this area because it seems like the customers are at the end of the cycle asking these questions, and we maybe need to provide collateral pieces, which we have, to our sales teams and others so they can start those conversations earlier in the cycle. We found that over the past 2 years, having provided really meaty one-sheets on privacy, on anti-corruption, on ethics, on channel compliance, as just 3 examples, we've seen that we get less bombarded at the end of a sales cycle with those things, and we're finding, and salespeople are telling us, they feel like that there's a little bit of a shorter sales cycle time. And that's business value right there. I can't give you a dollar amount, but that's business value.
I don't have anything to add in terms of practical approaches. I will observe that I find this question actually pretty confounding, this challenge. Because to pick up on some of the stuff I said before, a lot of what we're talking about is shifting culture,
Yes.
shifting judgments that people make, very sort of soft things, hard to isolate. We sit down to try to structure questions to try to get at it without being too obvious that that's what you're doing. It's practically impossible. So I think all of us in this room recognize that it's not enough, or it shouldn't be enough to not be able to prove the effectiveness of what you're doing. But I think it's sort of the leading edge of the work we're doing to figure out a way to do it and really get to the heart of the problem. So please, as soon as you guys figure it out, you know how to reach me. Tell me the great solution you've come up with that doesn't involve paying like a behavioral scientist from Harvard too much money to structure a few questions, and I'll be happy to adopt it.
That's really true.
So I'm going to pause here. I just would love to take some questions from the audience. Anything that, yes?
I have a probably silly question. It's probably because I'm too old. But for Nicole, I didn't get the clicker thing. I don't know what that is.
They're like little remote control devices, and they're numbered like 1 through 9, or A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then you have questions, and then you have them do a multiple choice, so they're picking which answer is the best. And then they vote, and then you can see the numbers. And then after you close out polling, it'll show you the number of people that clicked on the different answers, and then it shows what the right answer is.
So it's something you use for an in-person or live training, or it's...
Yes, and you can also do it online, or if you're doing like a webinar, they can vote. You don't actually need the clicker. You can do it just from your laptop or your smartphone.
Yes.
I have a question also for Nicole on the meeting moments.
Mhm.
Two questions, actually. One is, what is the actual requirement? Is it like all meetings, or certain types of meetings, or a certain number per month? Like, how do you make that reasonable so people will do it? And the second question is just on accountability. How do you know that people did do it?
For what we say is it's all meetings. If you start out, like we have an all-day meeting, you just start it in the morning, you do one, and it lasts you for that time. We don't have meetings like bam, bam, bam all day. So most people may do an ethics moment once a week, a couple times a week. So it doesn't feel like it's overwhelming. We've done a lot of training for them. I like live ethics moments. That's why I try to give a lot of different situations so that they can use that. And then your second question was on how do you understand if it's actually having an impact?
No, the accountability.
The accountability, okay. With the accountability, it's really our employees keep people accountable, because if they try to start something, they'll say, we didn't do a meeting moment, which is great to hear, because before they'd be like, please don't have anybody bring it up. But now they actually do it, because a lot of people like to use their own personal moment to share that, and then share that information to say, this is what we're doing. We don't have any requirements to say, we say you should do it, but there's no sanctions if you don't do it. We just say, you are encouraged to do it.
So we have time for, yes, the gentleman at the back.
I think you adopted a mobile strategy for your training.
Yeah, we have. Our online training is much of the content is already mobile enabled. Our game is not. It's a little more complex to do the game mobile right now. But we've got videos that you can do in a mobile setting and some other things that we're bringing to bear. So, yeah, we do have a mobile strategy. I would not say we do the best job of marketing the fact that it's a heavily mobile strategy, but we do have it.
And we don't.
We just have to, given how many employees we have. They're constantly on the road, so it's kind of the way we have to be. We're also just lucky a vendor that we use. It's already built that in. We didn't have to make it happen ourselves. Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I think time's up, so thank you so much for being
Thanks,
a great
everybody.
audience. Thanks for the panel.